Drew, thank you. Today marks the 4-year anniversary since the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, leaving abortion access up to individual states.
And that decision led Wisconsin to be without abortion access for several months, you recall, due to the debate over an 1849 law. Now, other states continue to enforce bans, and that impacts an estimated 27 million women. Jason Zimmerman reaching out to people on both sides of this issue and joins us now live in studio. Jason?
Chris, Senator Tammy Baldwin spoke out late this afternoon, highlighting her efforts to maintain abortion access, and did so alongside a Kenosha woman who told her story involving 2 troubled pregnancies and the potential need for an abortion to save her life. Laurel Marcinka says she became pregnant in the fall of 2022, but had a number of complications because of this. Her doctors told her the baby would need to be induced. But unfortunately, the young girl died just after 2 days of being born. Then months later, she became pregnant again, and like the first pregnancy, started having complications, including blood clots in the uterus. Her concerns grew because if an abortion was necessary to save her life, it wasn't possible living in Kenosha, because this was during that period when Wisconsin wasn't performing abortions.
We were at risk of the same situation unfolding again, and I decided to seek care out of state for the entire pregnancy due to the possible need for abortion care at any point in pregnancy. Illinois' abortion laws are much more flexible than Wisconsin's, and I desperately needed that flexibility.
Marcinka says she never needed that abortion and her child is doing okay. Meanwhile, Pro-Life Wisconsin issued a statement to us saying, quote, "The right to life is not granted by a court or government. It is bestowed by God upon every human being from the very moment of conception, and no law can take that truth away," end quote. 13 states have bans or near bans on abortion, plus another 12 have heavy restrictions on the procedure. Cammie, back to you.